Welcome to Soul Treats, a serving of bite-sized blessings. Join us as we sip a cup of God's message together with grace-filled stories from various amazing people combined together into a bite-sized serving. Soul Treats. Catch us every Wednesdays and Saturdays, 7:30 p.m. on Facebook Live.
Ayan, good evening mga ka-soul treats, magandang gabi. Ako ulit yung makakasama dahil ang ating Kuya Rai ay Daddy Duties. Kamusta Kuya Mori?
Hello, Ate May. Kumusta mga ka-Soul Treaters? I'm so excited for this episode. Mga ka-Soul Treats, kumusta po kayo? Good morning dyan sa other part of the globe. Ano ba ang heat index ngayon sa Pilipinas? Nakatatlong shower na yata. Kaya, kumusta kayo mga ka-Soul Treaters? It's
Napakainit.
the heat of the season. Ano po? Ate May, kumusta? Kumusta kayo dyan? Kala mo ang layo
Ano,
no?
parang parang magkabilang mundo tayo, pero kapitbahay lang tayo. So, ayan, napakainit. Sobrang init. Hindi ko alam kung yung panahon mainit o ako ang mahinit. Ayan. Nawawala
In,
tuloy ako. Ayaw,
in
ayaw
the scale
mag-agree.
of sa geographical scale ng internet ay magkapit-bahay lang kami ni Ate May. Pero
Yes.
nasa magkabilang side kami ng Santa Rosa, Laguna. Kumusta po mga ka-soul treaters? It's a beautiful Saturday evening and I am with Ate May here. As always, uunahan ko na kayo. Magandang gabi po. Sabihin nyo nga ang inyong mga bite-sized blessings. Ano yung mga blessings na natanggap nyo this moment, kahapon, kanina, mga nakaraang araw? Precisely, ito pong ating kwentuhan na ito, itong ating puntahan na ito, para iparamdam sa bawat isa kung ano yung ating mga blessings na nadadama, mga bite-sized blessings. Ate May, anong mga bite-sized blessings mo during these past few days?
Siyempre, I had a bonding with my daughter. We had our hair
Aham.
done.
Aham. Aham.
Siyempre, dahil very, very special ang ating guest ngayon, kailangan nakasuklay ako ngayong araw na to. Hindi pwede hindi nakasuklay. So, bukod doon sa mother and daughter bonding, today is a very special day for me and for my better half. It's been a decade and 5 for us. Yeah.
Ayan, no.
That's
Mga
our
ka-soul
blessing.
treaters, anniversary po ni Ate May at ni Kuya Joey. Timo? So, 15 years of
Yes.
pagbobolahan, 15
Correct.
years of togetherness, pero always blooming ang ating si Ate May. So, Kuya Joey, Brad Joey, if you're watching right now, tanggapin mo ang pagbati ng Soul Treats community. Isang masintahing anibersaryo sa inyong dalawa. Ayos ba? Ayos ba yan natin?
Maraming salamat. Ang lalim eh. Ang lalim nun ah. Hindi
Opo.
natin maaro. Kayo
Ayan,
po
no.
mga ka-soul treats, ano po ang inyong bite-sized blessing this week? Good evening, Kuya Nes Lopez.
Yes, Kuya Nes. Brad
Hello
J. Rex.
po.
Good evening,
And
Brad J. Rex. Brad J. Rex,
Yes,
maraming
Santa
salamat.
Rosa.
Maraming salamat sa pagbibigay, sa pag-endorse sa ating very inspiring person.
Correct.
Kundi dahil sa iyo, hindi natin makakasama ngayon yung aking i-introduce maya-maya, no, Timea. Speaking of bite-sized blessings, mga ka-soul treats, pasok mga blessings nyo. Ako, Ate May, ang masasabi ko na bite-sized blessing, tunay, di ba? Pag sabing bite-sized, kagat-kagat lang, no? But as always, it's the value of the family. It's the value of life. Yung, tama kayo, yung bonding with the children. But this time, meron akong somehow na nakita sa aking sarili, yung me time. Yung sarili mo, you take care of yourself, pause for a while, a few minutes, centering yourself, nothing to do, nowhere to go, just you and God alone. It's a wonderful experience kapag nangyayari sa akin tong bagay na ito. No? Opo. Sabi ni Brad Ness, Ate Mayo, my bite-sized blessing, we are elated to learn that our daughters are planning ahead for our 47th wedding anniversary. Lupit, oh? Saludo
Mas
dito.
marami yan.
Grabe to. On June 12 this year, either in Tagaytay City, somewhere in Bicol region, or Palawan, or where else. Nothing final yet. Bradness, sa June 12
June 12.
po,
Free kami niyan ni
anniversary
Kuya
po ni
Boris.
Bradness, libre kami dyan.
Yes.
Bekenemen, opo, kung
Ikelemes.
paano nung dineclare ng ating sino ba nag-declare ng presidente
Sa
na ang
Cavite.
nung iwinagayway ni Emilio Aguinaldo ang ating watawat at
Watawat.
binanggit na tayo ay malaya na ba talaga? Ay tayo ay isang nasyon
Habang nangyayari
Ano?
ang ating kalayaan, si Bradness ay
yes, habang nangyayari
libat
yun.
ang kanyang kalayaan.
Pero hindi naman ganun katagal na Bradness.
Diba?
So, hindi naman ganun katagal. But the thing is, June 12, ang ganda. So, advance, happy anniversary Bradness and your wife na po. Ronaldo, Brad Ronnie, hello po. Hello Brad Ronnie, kasama natin dito yan. Ano po? The country celebrating its independence, but that was the date when I lost mine. Oh, nawala. That's beautiful, Kuya Nes, no? Habang pinagdiriwang daw natin ang ating kalayaan, itong araw na yon, isinuko naman ni Kuya Nes ang kanyang kalayaan.
Kalayaan. Yan. At tapang atao. Yan.
Yan, opo.
Kayo po, mga ka-soul treats, ano pa ang inyong mga iba't ibang bite-sized blessing? Katulad ni Ate Lilibet Dizon, ang ating walang humpay na ka-soul treaters from Los Baños. Musta mga ka-soul treats? Bite ko na, attend ko ng wedding ng kaibigan ko sa Antigua del Carmen, Silang Cavite. Kanina naman, namit ko ang dati kong office mate sa amin sa SM. Sama free niya ako mag-McDonald's. Kauwi ko lang din.
Hello,
Sarap
Sister
naman.
Malibet. Ganda naman.
Wedding na lang at McDo si Ate Lilibet. Hello po sa inyong lahat dyan, sa ating mga ka-soul treats sa Los Baños. Magandang gabi po sa inyong lahat.
Pasok lang po kayo habang nagpapainit tayo dito. Ate May, what do you think? Shall we introduce our very inspiring person at this moment? Ang mga ka-soul treaters,
feeling ko marami tayong matututunan sa kanya. At dahil marami tayong matututunan sa kanya, yung mga ating mga ka-soul treats na naka-tune in na, don't forget to share, like, and subscribe sa ating Facebook and YouTube channel para po mas marami pa po maabot ang ating cyber mission, mas marami pa po tayong matulungan sa ating mga bite-sized blessing na sinishare dito sa ating cyber mission.
Ang ganda ng sabi ni Brad J. Rex. Brad J. Rex. Bite-sized blessing, first Sunday po ng Flores de Maria sa aming chapel sa Sanctuario de Padre Pio. Opening and blessing bukas ng paresan sa aming paupahan. Tunay. Ang ganda naman. Ang mga ka-soul treats, buwan ng Mayo po. Ang buwan ng Mayo ay buwan ng mga bulaklak. Ang buwan ng mga bulaklak ay para sa ating mahal na ina. Ano po?
Yung mag-aalay ng bulaklak.
Opo. Ang sarap alalahanin nung maliliit pa kami, Timay, doon sa atin sa parokya, yung awitin na itong bulaklak na alay ng aming pagsintang tunay. Speaking of pagsinta, sisimulan ko na ipapakilala ko na po sa inyo ang ating very inspiring person. Timay, tinignan ko yung kanyang humingi kasi tayo ng curriculum vitae niya. And I was overwhelmed. Mauubos yung isang oras natin kapag inisa-isa ko yung kanyang mga dissertations and everything, mga publications, mga ka-soul treaters when you publish a book. Diba? When you're a guest speaker in so many commencement exercises, retreats, mga citations from various associations, when you have academic presentations in different levels, when you have international fellowships, ang makikita natin ay malaki to. I mean, ang sarap. This person has a lot to share and we have a lot of learning from him. And besides, tunay talagang. Kanina nga sa backstage buhat na magkita kami lang saglit nagkakwentuhan kami. Mukhang ang sarap-sarap niyang kakwentuhan na po. Simulan ko po yung mga pinag-aralan niya. Nag-Bachelor of Arts po siya sa University of San Diego, California. Galing po siya sa San Carlos Seminary. So from there, Bachelor of Arts, and listen to this, mga ka-Soul-Treats, nag-masteral po siya ng Theological Studies sa Harvard Divinity School. Ulitin ko po, masteral ng Theological Studies sa Harvard Divinity School, saan to? Cambridge, Massachusetts. Pag narinig natin yan, yung Harvard Divinity School sa Cambridge, Massachusetts, opo. After masteral ng Theological Studies, it doesn't stop there. Hindi po siya tumigil ng kanyang leaning, ng kanyang paghahanap ng wisdom to satisfy his longing for God, to satisfy his cerebral questions of God in our lives. Meron po siyang Doctor of Philosophy. Ulitin ko po, meron po siyang Doctorate of Philosophy. He's a Doctor of Philosophy sa Graduate School of Union sa Berkeley. Okay? Nagturo po siya sa Lynch School of Education. Nagturo po siya sa Boston Theological Institute. Nagturo po siya sa Academy of Our Lady of Guam, Inter-Island. Nanggaling din po siya, humipo rin po siya ng mga puso sa kanyang pagtuturo sa Damien Memorial School, Pacific School of Religion. Ito sa University of San Francisco. Marami siyang tinuro at marami siyang in-impart na wisdom doon. Doon din po siya Stuart Hall High School of the Sacred Heart sa San Francisco, California. And I believe nandun siya ngayon. Nagtuturo po siya at present sa Union Theological Seminary, somewhere here in Cavite. Ngayon po, nagtuturo din siya sa Theology and Religious Education Department ng De La Salle University. It's beautiful. Mga ka-Soul-Treats, habang binabanggit ko itong mga bagay na to, i-ready na niyo ang inyong mga katanungan. Ang dami niyang isasagot para sa atin. Hindi ko na po papatagalin sa inyo. Such a wonderful person. Ang sarap makahuntahan, mag-i-impart siya ng maraming insights sa atin. Pasalubungan po natin siya, mga ka-Soul-Treaters, ng ating 1111, si Michael Cepidoza Campos. Hello po, Brad Michael.
Magandang umaga, Kuya Mori. Hi, Ate May.
Hello, good morning sa inyo.
Right. Ang ganda umaga. You know, I think my connection is a little bit spotty, pero I hope na narinig niyo ako. Magandang
Clear
umaga.
naman
Okay,
po.
great. Okay.
Clear ang inyong
Thank
audio,
you.
medyo naiiwan lang ng konti yung video.
Napansin ko nga eh.
Tuloy-tuloy lang po tayo.
Okay, no worries. All good. Okay.
How are you, Brad Michael? How are you? Kumusta po kayo dyan? Ang init kasi dito. How about there?
Here it's a little too early in the morning. It's about 4:45 in the morning here. So I have my cup of coffee and I think I'm good to go.
Wow, that's beautiful. Kanina
It's
po mga
okay.
ka-Soul-Treaters, kasi ngayon hawak ni Brad Michael yung kanyang cup of coffee. Pero kanina, di ba, Ate May, sa backstage, alam nyo, pinag-uusapan namin, mga ka-Soul-Treaters, yung Benz halo-halo.
Halo-halo.
Yeah, no, that was pretty cool.
Grabe, kaya ayun, nakakatuwa naman na natikman ni Brad Michael yung talk of the town na halo-halo ngayon. On this
Apparently,
part
right?
of the planet. Opo. Kumusta po kayo dyan? Bukod dun sa mga binanggit ko kanina, Brad Michael, at present, ano pa po ang inyong pinagkakaabalahan?
No, I'm primarily
Parang hindi abala no?
No, I'm primarily a high school teacher, right? More than
Apa.
anything else, that's really the work that I do every day. And so I do teach here in San Francisco at Stewart Hall. So it's actually the boys' high school component of the Schools of the Sacred Heart. But more than anything else, all of the other academic work that I do is drawn out of what I do in the classroom. So, you know, if I think about the kind of work that is important for me, it's really being with teenagers in a high school classroom. Yeah.
Okay, that's beautiful. So, paano yung Brad Mike, nakita ko sa resume mo, at present, nagtuturo ka rin sa DLSU ba or sa Union Theological Seminary? How's that? Online ba yon or may schedule ka ng pag-uwi? Paano po yan, Brad Mike?
So the Union Theological Seminary was only for one summer. That was actually prior to the pandemic. I was
Oh,
doing a
wow.
visitor professorship there. Pero yung sa Lasal, I had gone home during the pandemic. At that time kasi I was able to get a position, or I was able to teach within the department. Pero once I accepted that position, I had no idea that we were all going to end up in a pandemic. So when I went
Opo,
home,
opo,
I
opo.
never had the chance to step onto campus. So all of my lessons took place
Hmm.
online, literally, and I never actually got to step into LaSalle. I don't know how LaSalle looks like from inside. I had a selfie outside, pero wala akong
Okay.
idea kung ano itsura ng LaSalle sa loob. I'm sure it's beautiful, but
Opo, opo.
that's all from the photos that I see of other friends.
Di ba, Ate May, ano, kanina tinatanong lang ni Brad Mike, magkakilala ba kayo ni Brad Gyrex? Sa totoo lang, Brad Mike, hindi pa kami nakikita ni Gyrex. And that's
Talaga?
that's the
Okay.
wonder of technology, no po. Nakakapagturo kayo, ayun, selfie na lang sa fasad ng Lasal, di ba? No?
Exactly.
And look
That's
at
the
that.
closest I've gotten to LaSalle. I mean, it's a great school and everything. My students are fantastic. My colleagues are great.
Tunay.
But I have no idea how the campus looks like. So it didn't really matter whether I was in the Philippines or here.
Ate May and mga kasoltrics, bago ang lahat, nais ko lang banggitin yung banggit ni Brad Ness from Calapan, Oriental
Yes.
Mindoro nung ma-introduce natin si Brother Mike. Very good modulated voice. Nice. Salita pa lang yan, ha? How much more kung kakanta?
I don't sing.
Sinagot na agad. I don't
Brad
think.
Ness.
No.
But thank you for that, Brad Ness.
But thank you.
Modulated voice.
Yeah, he has a good voice. Yeah.
From Brother Ronaldo Aldan Paet, good evening po. Brad Michael, kamusta kayo? Ano yung masasabi niyong bite-sized blessings as part of our tradition here in Salt Lake? Ano mga bite-sized blessings na natanggap niyo this past few days or months?
I really think it's the enduring nature of friendships. I mean, I was talking to Ate May kanina. The reason why I got connected with Soul Treats was primarily because of J-Rex, no? So J-Rex Kasakop has been a friend since 1988 when we
Wow,
went to
grabe.
seminary together. And it's not as if we keep in contact regularly, but every time I'm in Manila, he makes sure to reach out. So in a sense, when you think about the fact that friendships endure across time and space, it doesn't have to be something that happens every day. And so the blessing of human relationships, I think, are very real for me, especially during the past couple of weeks.
Tunay, no? Ganda,
Tama
Timmy.
yan. It doesn't mean you should be together every day. Mag-usap
Right.
kayo. So, hindi lang yun ang way of sasabihin mong you are friends. Pero
Right.
kahit malayo kayo, kahit hindi kayo masyadong nag-usap, but in your heart, you are friends, then you are friends. Yun yung sinasabing talaga magkaibigan. Hindi lang sa
Right.
salita. Yan.
Tunay na
Exactly.
tunay. So,
Yeah.
speaking of Brother Gyrex, in-spill, no? Brad Mike, sabi mo hindi ka kumakanta, but look at this, sabi ni Brad Gyrex, part si Mike ng Optimi Choir. You know, lagi namin narinig yung Optimi Choir from San Carlos, Brad Mike. Sabi ni Brad Gyrex, part si Mike ng Optimi Choir. Those were the days, no po? Those were the days. Yan talaga yung sinasabi na enduring friendship, no? Opo. Okay.
Yeah, no, I play the piano. I didn't sing, but whatever.
Ah,
Okay. Opo. Nakakatawa
J-Rex
yung
talaga. Anyway, go ahead.
sabi nga ni Kuya Chris is one of our hosts actually. Truly friendship that endures time and space is a gift. Ayan.
tunay.
At
Thank
talagang
you, Kuya
matuturing
Chris.
mong gift kasi hindi lahat meron ito. Just a
Tunay.
few.
Tunay. And it's so wonderful na at this early ng kwentuhan natin, no po, mga ka-soul treaters, parang na-hit somehow agad ng ating very inspiring person, the beauty of human relations, the
Right.
beauty of
Correct.
friendship. No po, at kaganda-ganda niyan. At this point, mga ka-soul treaters, ipasok natin yung Bible verse na pinili ni Brother Michael. Di ba, mga ka-soul treaters, humihingi tayo ng somehow favorite Bible verse or guiding verse or somewhere in the scripture that struck them in their life particularly na po. Ate May, ano nabanggit or napili ni Brad Michael na Bible verse sa ating
Medyo mahaba
kwentuhan
pero
ngayon.
maganda siya. Magandang story. Excuse me. So,
Go ahead.
habang inaayos ni Brother Michael ang kanyang camera, babasahin ni Kuya Mori ang kanyang napiling Bible verse, which is Luke 24 verses 13 to 35 on the road to Emmaus.
Okay na, ako nang babasa, Timay.
Yes po.
Sige pa. Oh, this is beautiful. On the road to Emmaus. Okay. From Luke 24:13 to 35. Now, that same day, two of them were going to a village called Emmaus, about 7 miles from Jerusalem. They were talking with each other about everything that had happened. As they talked and discussed these things with each other, Jesus himself came up and walked along with them. But they were kept from recognizing him. He asked them, "What are you discussing together as you walk along?" They stood still, their faces downcast. One of them, named Cleopas, asked him, "Are you the only one visiting Jerusalem who does not know the things that have happened there in these days?" "What things?" he asked. "About Jesus of Nazareth," they replied. "He was a prophet, powerful in word and deed before God and all people. The chief priests and our rulers handed him over to be sentenced to death, and they crucified him. But we had hoped that he was the one who was going to redeem Israel. And what is more, it is the third day since all this took place. In addition, some of our women amazed us. They went to the tomb early this morning but didn't find his body. They came and told us that they had seen a vision of angels who said he was alive. Then some of our companions went to the tomb and found it just as the women had said, but they did not see Jesus." He said to them, "How foolish you are, and how slow to believe all that the prophets had spoken. Did not the Messiah have to suffer these things and then enter his glory?" As they approached the village to which they were going, Jesus continued on as if he were going further. But they urged him strongly, "Stay with us, for it is nearly evening. The day is almost over." So he went in to stay with them. When he was at the table with them, he took bread, gave thanks, broke it, and began to give it to them. Then their eyes were opened, and they recognized him. And he disappeared from their sight. They asked each other, "Were not our hearts burning within us while he talked with us on the road and opened the scriptures to us?" They got up and returned at once to Jerusalem. There they found the 11 of those with them, assembled together and saying, "It is true, the Lord has risen and has appeared to Simon." Then the two told what had happened on the way and how Jesus was recognized by them when he broke the bread. Mga kasoltritas, the gospel of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Praise to you, O Lord Jesus Christ. Wow. The road to Emmaus, no, Ate May. Ito yung
Yes, very
katatapos na mabuhay
beautiful.
ng ating Panginoon. At this point, mga kasoltreators, Ate May, iiwanan po natin Brad Mike, such a powerful part of the scripture. Bakit ito napili mo? The table is yours. Brad Mike, go ahead. Bakit po the road to Emmaus?
Thank you for reading that, Kuya Mori. I think for me that story has always been actually relevant. A little bit of a background. It's actually
Go
really
ahead.
funny when you folks were asking me about my favorite scriptures. My initial response was this: "Excuse me, I was raised Catholic, so being typically Catholic, I don't read the Bible. So having like these bite-sized scriptural verses was not something I grew up with. It's not
Okay.
part of my upbringing, and my family was also not particularly, especially my dad, who just passed away recently, was not particularly religious. So having bite-sized, what do you call this, messages doesn't quite resonate with me. However, this story has always struck me as unusual, particularly because it had to do with a lot of outsiders, right? So when you think about these two people that were walking to Emmaus, right after the resurrection, una sa lahat, hindi natin alam kung ano yung mga pangalan nila, o nabigyan man yung pangalan, hindi natin alam kung ano yung ginagawa nila, ano relasyon nila sa disciples, the ones that were closest to Jesus. So I was actually struck by the fact that these people were outsiders.
Apa.
And then secondly, the other thing that really stays with me was the fact that they were actually experiencing trauma. So sometimes when we think about the resurrection, ang focus natin is basically this idea of new life and the celebratory element of this event. And yet we somehow forget, or at least I somehow forget, that the resurrection really was intimately tied to the death of a person that was deeply beloved to them. So the reason why these two men were leaving, I mean, who knows why they were leaving, but I suspect it was partly because of a deep sense of trauma, a deep sense of fear, and perhaps this sense na somehow or the other, everything that they believed about their world somehow was shattered, no? So lahat ng paniniwala nila, expectations, their hopes were somehow shattered because
Apa. Apa.
this person who was so intimate to them was crucified. And so how intimate was it that these two men who were probably leaving Jerusalem, fearful for their own lives, fearful for their future, would encounter someone who, in so many ways, felt um, probably had a sense that they were abandoned by the death of this beloved. And so, what does it mean to actually encounter something that was so profoundly life altering, um, and yet at the same time find some hope in trauma? And so for me, the story of Emmaus was really this sense of encountering hope in the midst of profound loss. And even if you don't necessarily understand what that sense of loss might be like at the
Hmm.
beginning,
Hmm.
um, to continue the journey
Hmm.
and perhaps to continue the process of discovery, even if it seems impossible at that given moment. So that was the reason why that story was really profound for me.
Hmm.
I've always found that it spoke more to people who are outside the normative institutions of our times. It spoke to me as a person who was probably not raised in a church, who was not raised in conventional religious contexts, but in a way also spoke to um, a general aspect of the human condition, that of loss.
Brad Michael, it's just a few minutes ago that you mentioned that your father passed away just a
Mhm.
few days ago.
Right.
Is, is, is this connected on what you are talking, or the trauma of the loss? Is this connecting somehow on what you're experiencing right now, or
Yeah.
in general? Go ahead, Brad Mike.
No, definitely. No, actually, so my father passed away April 19th. And so that's the reason why we were in Manila. Also trying to accompany my mom and also the rest of the family during this time. I do have to say, when you think about a blessing, his passage was quite peaceful. His passage took place under perhaps the most gracious of circumstances. So there's much for which we're also grateful in the midst of this loss. So this story has taken on that kind of a significance for me. Pero my attention, or at least my attraction to this particular story, um, precedes even my father's passing.
Apa,
So this is something that I've always found to be um, not just inspiring, but offers me an invitation to be critical of the human condition, and then to also take note of the fact that part of what makes us human is encountering loss, and also in that sense being open to the possibility that experience of loss can be transformative.
it's so hard to encompass and understand cerebrally at this point, yung pagbanggit mo ka ng encountering hope from a trauma.
Right.
Di ba po? Kasi ang nakikita lang natin sa mga nangyayari sa atin, of course, siguro, yung sinasabi mo na initially, no? But is time a factor, Brad Michael?
Mhm.
Do you intentionally seek for hope pagka katatapos mo lang ng trauma, kagaya na nangyari doon sa dalawang lumalayo sa Jerusalem,
Mm.
what do you think? When you said they were outsiders, sa palagay niyo ba, lumalayo sila dahil naghahanap sila ng hope o talagang at that moment, trauma lang talaga yung nakikita nila? Paano yung hindi nakitaan ng pagbe-break ni Jesus ng bread? Paano yung ibang naglalakad galing sa Jerusalem na hindi kagaya nitong dalawang to na hindi pinagpakitaan ng ating Panginoon at hindi nakasama sa pagbe-break ng bread? Those questions, what do you think? Because you're speaking of human conditions, di ba po? O
Oo.
swerte lang ba talaga yung dalawang yon o is it a symbolism na merong ganung pangyayari talaga sa lahat ng tao?
That's a really great question, Kuya Mori. When I think about where this gospel is found, so it's in the Gospel of Luke, right? And there's such a regular focus that this particular gospel
Opo.
gives to outsiders in our community. Like, we think about the opposite side of the resurrection, which is the birth narratives, right? So the Gospel of Luke presents Jesus as having been born in a stable, basically, again, an outsider, witnessed to, first of all, by basically shepherds, outsiders in the community. And
Wow.
so I think there's something to be said about this particular gospel's focus on people who are considered outsiders. So, um, for me, the idea of being an outsider has been something that's been real for me for pretty much most of my life. I
Opo.
happen to be a gay person, right?
Dahil,
I've known I was gay since I was 5 years old, and being gay in the Philippines, I had gone to an all boys high school. Is not necessarily something that's considered to be what do you call this, normative, or that you had a prescribed script by which you lived your life. Especially as a person coming into one's sexual identity. And for me, especially when I was living in the seminary, the question that always comes up is, how do you reconcile this sense of being other, this sense of being considered different, with enduring expectations that are somehow heaved on us? And so the sense of loss is not just a one time event. Sometimes it's literally your very person as an embodiment of loss. So that doesn't just apply to me as a gay person. I'm sure for every person in this particular room right now, we have a particular experience of becoming outsiders,
opo.
whether it be a moment or whether it be something that's associated with who we are and our own identity, or whether it be because our relationships just aren't living up to the expectations of society. Married
Oo.
couples, perhaps, that are having difficulties with their own sense of fidelity, with their own sense of commitment to their children. All of us have touch points, entry points to these moments of loss. And so I think, to go back to your question, when I think about moments of loss, I'm not talking about something that's spectacularly unusual. I'm talking about something that's fundamental to human existence.
Correct.
And so, if we were to somehow orient our encounter of God, not simply as coming from a moment of grace, but also coming from a moment of loss, and perhaps a sense of being displaced or being rendered as an outsider, there's much to be said about helping us understand the meaning of our own conditions and finding space by which we can empathize with other people in ways that are probably a little bit more open to learning from another person. So it's a little bit more humble, I think. We come in with a sense of forgiveness, both for them and also for our own sense of limitation. We sense that yung pagkukulang natin ay nagiging pagkakataon para makipag-ugnay sa ibang tao dahil pareho tayong limited, di ba?
That's beautiful.
Wonderfully said. Yeah.
Ate May,
Yes.
you have some questions for him. I have a lot on mind. Pero
Mm.
when you were nodding, Ate May, you have some questions
Kasi
for.
every word na binanggit niya is totoo. Hindi mo
Mhm.
pwedeng i-disagree. It's a human nature. It really every every aspect of life, every stages ng buhay, sabi mong lower class, middle class,
Right.
high
Yeah.
class,
Mhm.
everyone
Mm.
is in this, yung sinasabi niya tinutukoy dito, yung sa dalawang, nagre-represent
Right.
every class and every walk of life,
Right.
nire-represent yung dalawang tao na naglalakad
Right.
on the road to Emmaus.
Mm.
That's what, um, naintindihan ko tuloy siya ngayon kasi dati hindi
Yes.
kasi ako nagmamahal sa Bible.
Ako,
Actually, these soul traits help me understand the Bible is the greatest love story ever written.
Yeah,
Hindi ko
wow.
actually,
siya na,
that's a good point. Yeah.
yes,
Ako.
hindi siya nawawala sa panahon.
Mm-mm.
Kumbaga, bawat verse, bawat Bible verse, ay tumataon talaga siya sa pagkakataon, sa mga bawat, kaya nga tinatanong namin, ano ang significance nitong Bible
Right.
verse nito sa inyong life journey. Kasi hindi siya
Right.
nawawalan ng hindi siya nawawalan ng connection. Parang bawat verse, bawat chapter sa Biblia ay merong kumukonek
Right.
sa aspect, sa journey ng buhay mo. Kaya nga hindi
Right.
siya nawawala sa panahon. Whether you're Gen Z, Generation X, or Generation ABC, talagang tumutugma pa rin siya. Hindi siya
Right.
nawawala sa panahon. It's really the best love story ever written.
Right.
Yan. And dito ko sa Soul Traits naririnig yung mga kakaibang um, life story na nagko-connect talaga sa Bible verse. Katulad
Yes,
ngayon,
Tony.
Right. Right.
nagkakaroon ako ng in-depth understanding, 'di ba? Kasi pag binasa mo lang, ganun yun, oo. Pero
Sa
once you heard
konteksto.
it, yeah, you heard it from another person, because we have different perspectives. He has different perspectives. Oo, tama pala yun. Yun pala yun. There's also a hidden story na pwede rin pala yun, 'di ba? So, I was very lucky tonight. Yeah. Every
Ako,
Wednesday and every Saturdays, I am very lucky to be with our VIPs who's
Brad
very
Mike, ako,
knowledgeable, 'di
that's
ba?
beautiful. Brad
Yeah,
Mike,
very very.
I will have to ask this question.
Sure.
During, uh, when did you feel, oh, of course, I would assume that you felt you're an outsider. Kasi
Mhm.
you laid the predicate earlier on. When did you feel that I have to study more? I have to uh, correlate what I'm feeling into my mind. Kailan mo naramdaman na I am an outsider and this culture doesn't fit people like me, an outsider. O, uh, meron ka bang naging mission sa sarili mo na sabihin sa kapwa mo outsider na, halika, pag-usapan natin to. Yung timeline ha, Brad Mike ha, from 5 years old, I don't know, go ahead.
Talaga life story, ano?
Just
Medyo
rather,
kailangan.
Oh,
yung mga ano lang, mga major na pagkakataon sa buhay mo, then you told yourself na I want to learn more. I want to know more about the human condition.
Right. You know, when you think about it, parang, again, being an outsider for me was an important entry point. Pero it's not the only entry point, right? Going back to what Ate May was talking about earlier, for example, we have four gospels, right? And four gospels talk about Jesus. Pero as we know, people that spend time reading the scriptures, trying to sort of enter the world of the scriptures, we know that each of those four gospels have different emphases
Hmm.
of the same story, and so they're actually trying to address issues that are specific to their community. So
Ah,
Matthew, for example, would present Jesus
yes.
as a king. So hindi outsider, talaga nasa loob ka. At ikaw ang powerful person, di ba? Like even the birth of Jesus in Matthew presents him as a king, not with the shepherds, pero before the wise people that were present at his birth. But Luke for me was important kasi ang naging entry point sa akin was that experience of being an outsider. And in the same way that I was attracted to Luke specifically, it also revealed for me that the way I process my understanding of the world is really through study. But that's not necessarily common, or not, that's not necessarily the same for all. There are other people that process their sense of meaning through
Mhm.
art.
Opo.
There are some people that process
Tunay.
their meaning through conversations, through community building. It just so happens that for me, my language that felt most intimate to my own upbringing was really interrogating, asking questions. And so, study for me was not a response to, but simply
Aha.
a natural, what do you call this? It was the natural outcome of my own upbringing. It's something that I grew up with. So, to go back to my father, no, it's interesting during the final days of his life. Of course, his body was already weakening, and you spend time with him as his body was totally was already starting to weaken, and he was starting to succumb to his illness. And every time we talk, he's an engineer. His language is really analysis, right? So we're talking, and then he gets into these analytical processes, and I'm thinking, oh my gosh,
Ingeniero.
yeah, exactly.
Ingeniero.
Ingenyero talaga. Sabi ko, Papa, you have to like, speak in simple words, whatever. Pero he was really technical about it. He was getting really precise about his ideas. But I also think that that's exactly how we make meaning of our life, in language and patterns and ways that are intimate to us. And for me, the learning is really the outcome of my primary language, which is really interrogating, questioning, asking perhaps why things are the way they are. And perhaps that's not even so necessarily removed from the fact that my first awareness of my own life is because of this sense of being an outsider, right? And so to go back to your point, medyo mahaba to dahil if you're asking about
Go
like
ahead.
at
Go
what
ahead.
point in your life do you
Opo.
first begin, to realize that you're an outsider? I think that that's something that most of us experience in different ways as well. And for me, again, that came in different forms. Of course, I mentioned this awareness that came with my own sexual identity, but it also came out of the fact that I grew up moving all over the place. Part of my
Mhm.
father's job basically had us move around every 2 to 3 years, which meant
Mm.
you were always going to be the new kid on the block. And you were always the
Okay.
one adjusting to contexts, and you're
Okay.
always the one trying to translate to people what
Okay.
you're trying to say in a variety of languages. So as a
Okay.
result, that sense of being an outsider simply was part of my own self awareness.
Hanggang hanggang sa dumating yung point na you decided, tama ba, ah, to pursue the academe. Was it that way? Was your life trajectory when you were being aware that you are, of course, parang palipat-lipat ng bahay.
Mhm.
So, di ba, Brad Mike, you're always adjusting to your environment. Nasanay ka ba doon? Nasanay ka doon sa ganong sistema na I would have to ask, different culture, Philippines, US, pinili mo ba ang, teka, dito ako pupunta sa lugar na to kasi mukhang mas kaya kong mag-adjust dito or pupunta ako dito dahil mas matututo ako dito. What was your reason in deciding na magturo sa US? Bukod, of
you know,
course, sa magagandang eskwelahan.
it's really funny because I was actually discouraged by my dad from teaching from the get-go. Like literally, he basically said, "You can do whatever you want to do with your life, but please don't teach." And I think that was partly because of the fact that he came from a family of teachers. My grandparents on my paternal side were both teachers, and I think Papa saw how challenging the life itself was. And of course, Papa, like typical of our generation, parang you
Mm,
want something better, quote unquote,
mm,
for your
mm,
children. And
ah,
for
ah,
Papa, he basically felt that your professional success
ah,
required other options, so to speak. And actually, the priesthood was an anomaly. And again, my family, we could be very typically Filipino on the one hand. On the other hand, we're not. So I was the only one that entered the seminary in my immediate family, and everybody was like, "Really? Where did that come from?" Ganon. And even that was itself kind of a curious, what do you call this? A curious exploration on my part. But at the end of it, I think I ended up really loving teaching because of encounters in my life. No, when I was in college, I ended up taking this class. Actually, it was a theology class. That's why I ended up pursuing theology. Who basically opened up theological language for me in ways that were powerfully transformative. This was a person that gave me permission to interrogate the tradition, not simply accept what was taught to me as a given, but literally interrogate it. And that for me was profoundly uh, transformative because it allowed me the intellectual agency to actually take part in my own understanding of life. And so, with that initial act of interrogating, it opened up the possibility that teaching is not just passing on information, passing on the data as if I were the source of all wisdom and knowledge, but rather inviting spaces where my own students can interrogate their own understandings and their own assumptions of given truths.
And in the
Um,
process, you yourself is learning.
Learning
Tama
too.
ba?
Definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Dun
definitely.
sa mga ganyan.
Yeah, definitely.
Sige po.
It's a
Go ahead,
two-way
Brad Mike.
process. Nagiging
Yeah.
two-way process siya. Yeah.
And it's kind of interesting because the other question that was asked for me from J Rex, and I think it was also Ate May, was like, who's your favorite saint? And I actually had to take pause. Sabi ko, Diyos ko, sa dinami-dami mga tao na gusto ko sanang bigyang pansin, favorite saint, like what does that even mean? Because of course, there's so many people in your lives that inspired you. But the person that literally, I guess, that one person that continues to really challenge my way of looking at the world was Edith Stein, who herself is a
Brad,
controversial saint, right? Because she, yeah, go
Brother
ahead.
Mike, I would have
Yeah,
to stop you for a while.
yeah.
Ate May, ipasok natin yung yung
Sige, go.
material for Edith Stein. I was
Yes,
about
it's not
we're about to
that.
ask that question, and that's profoundly interesting.
Sige, sige,
Yan.
sige, go.
Apa. Mga segment dito yan about the paboritong santo ng ating mga very inspiring person. Mga ka-soul treaters, okay, let me lay the predicate, mga ka-soul treaters. Di ba, iniimbitahan natin yung ating mga inspiring person, tinatanong natin mga paboritong santo, St. Augustine, San Antonio de Padua, St. Padre Pio, doctors of the church, mga mystics. Sa pagkakataong to, binanggit ng ating very inspiring person ang isang feminist. Okay? Pero siya lang mismo ang papakilala niya yung life story niya mas kilala at ma-share sa atin ng ating inspiring person. But truly very inspiring yung buhay ng pinakita ng paboritong santo na i-discuss ngayon ni Brother Mike. Sino yung favorite saint ng ating very inspiring person? Si Saint Edith Stein. Ang lalim ng storya nito. Ang hirap ng and I'm so interested right now at nag-iintay ako kung paano i-impart sa atin ng ating very inspiring person ang pinanggalingan o ang relevance ni Edith Stein sa ating ngayon bilang mga nakakaramdam na lahat naman tayo outsiders in one way or another. But Mike, bakit po si Saint Edith Stein? Go ahead po.
Ayan, sorry, I preempted the process. Pero
That's
actually,
the next question actually.
so Edith Stein was actually known. I mean, okay, in Catholic circles, she's known to be a saint. She was a victim of the Holocaust, but her story was a little bit more complicated. She actually is. She came from a very devout Jewish family in
Apa.
Eastern Europe, and at the age of 6, she actually was an atheist. And primarily because she basically came to the conclusion intellectually that the tradition and the household, what do you call this, practices that she grew up with did not make sense. It didn't actually align with her intellectual exploration. So for her, the idea of this belief in one God or this belief in God simply did not make any sense. So by the age of 6, she was basically saying, I'm an atheist. And then secondly, later on, this exploration didn't cease at that point. In fact, it actually led her to a deeper sense of questioning, interrogation, guys. So basically, that's the language I was talking about earlier, right? And this woman, Edith Stein, was able to obtain a PhD in philosophy in an area of philosophy called phenomenology. Kung tutuusin, basically it's a study of how we make sense of our own relationship with the outside world. the phenomenon of the outside world. Paano natin bibigyang pansin yon? Paano natin naiintindihan yon?
Opo.
And later on, she converted to Catholicism, actually became a Carmelite nun, but she continued to advocate for the interests of Jewish people because she also lived at a time when the Nazis were pretty much rising in power in Europe. In fact, she had written to the Pope to intervene on behalf of the Jewish people. So, actually, while she became Catholic and became a nun, no less, she was still very keenly aware of her identity as a Jew, which in Europe, in Nazi Europe at the time, was very much as
Death
much of an
sentence.
outsider as you can possibly be. Yeah, it's a death sentence, right? And even though she was a Catholic nun, she was dragged out of the monastery, shipped off to Auschwitz, and eventually died. Kaya nga actually, even her canonization is controversial. Eh. In the
Aha.
Jewish community, a lot of people
Opo.
say, like, why are you canonizing her? She wasn't killed because of her faith in Jesus. She was killed as a Jew. Which, when
Kami
you think
yan,
about it,
kami
yeah,
yan,
actually,
amin
yeah.
yan, amin yan. Parang ganun.
Well, it's not. No, it's not about Amin Yan. It's not about that. It's about the
Or
fact that she
something
wasn't.
like,
No, let me clarify this because this is
sige
important.
pa, go ahead, go
The
ahead.
reason why she was killed wasn't because she was dying for the Christian faith. She was killed as a Jew. And so that's the reason why a lot of people were saying, why are we canonizing her? Because her story was not tied to dying for the Christian faith in the same way that we think of Christian martyrs dying
Opo.
for the faith. She was killed because of her identity as a Jewish woman. And so, for me, okay, what does that mean? I think there's something profoundly powerful about the fact that even her death, even her martyrdom itself stood right at the edge of being considered to be a saint that we canonize and also an outsider to the very institution that canonized her. So she stood right at the edge, both of the Jewish community and the Christian community, both trying to make sense of her meaning making, both trying to make sense of how she understood God, but
Opo.
always falling short of full comprehension. And that's what I mean by the humility of encountering another person because we
Okay.
don't quite fully understand who they are. And as a result, serves as a mirror to our own limitation and to our own sense of faith that starts from a place of questioning rather than starting from a place of truth claiming. Magkaiba kasi yun eh. What does it mean to
Opo.
believe from a place of
Opo.
questioning and doubt rather from a place of truth claiming and certainty? And I think holding both in tension was something that I found profoundly inspiring with Edith Stein. So yeah, I love the fact that you chose that particular phrase because that's actually the phrase that inspired me the most with Edith Stein. No? Anyone who seeks truth seeks God, whether one realizes it or not. So for Stein, her entry point to God was seeking truth. And that means she had to be open to the possibility of not even comprehending what that truth may well be, or even open to the possibility that one doesn't comprehend or can claim to comprehend who God fully is. One can only stay in a position of questioning.
Opo. Doon sa, during the canonization, Brad Michael, which I find very interesting, na na-articulate mo naman fully being an outsider on both the Jewish community and the Catholic community, si Edith Stein. When when the Catholic Church was canonizing her, of course may mga steps yan. We know, di ba po ano?
Right, right.
Iba-iba.
Mhm.
I wonder siguro after our episode maghahanap ako ng publication, magbabasa ako. What was the response of the Catholic Church? Oh, was there an formal inquiry ba yun ng mga Jews, or just side comments na why are you canonizing her? Meron bang sagot ang Catholic Church as far as you know, kasi hindi ko alam na because we are being inclusive,
Hmm.
because she found the truth that she was seeking inside the fold of the church.
Right.
Was it like that? What do you think, Bradman?
You know, it's actually very interesting. I do want to say this. No, the irony of
Go
my
ahead.
life is this, and again, I
Go
tend to
ahead
be
po,
very,
please.
very logical. I tend to be very
Uh-huh.
secular, and I don't necessarily put a lot of weight in signs, no? Kasi yun ang, again, my language is more interrogatory, no? But in my life, some of my closest friends actually are very connected to the canonization of Edith Stein. Actually, one of my closest friends, her sister was the reason for which a miracle was attributed to Edith Stein. So I think that was really interesting, and I didn't know this connection until years later when I had asked, like, "Why is your sister named Benedicta?" And they were saying, "Oh, she was named
That's
after
her
Edith
name.
Stein because that was her religious name when she
It's
was in the
her Carmelite
monastery."
name.
Right, definitely. So I was thinking, "Oh my gosh, this is really interesting." And then secondly, when I was in Germany years and years ago, and I remember I was there for a couple of months, and I chanced upon the town Speyer, where Edith Stein actually spent 7 years teaching high school. Again, it's one of those things. I was just taking a train. I just wanted to like, because at that time, because it's so cheap to just take a train wherever and then just get off the train and then do whatever you want to do. And it happened to be the town of Speyer. And I remember walking around like, ay, sandali lang. Pamilya rata tong town na to. And of course, you encounter the church in which she actually spent time praying. You encounter the very high school in which she spent time actually working. And
Beautiful,
so
beautiful.
there's a part of me that wonders if perhaps the reason for which she was canonized had everything to do with the fact that the Catholic Church as an institution was trying to somehow lay claim to its own, and I'll say this carefully,
Go
to its
ahead, go ahead.
own wish to accompany the Jewish people during one of the darkest moments in their lives, perhaps.
Opo. Opo.
Perhaps, I'm not really sure. On the
Uh-huh.
other hand, it was also to honor a particular period in our modern history, thinkers that have developed new language in terms of understanding God. Not language of certainty, but language of doubt. Because again, if you were to qualify the kind of faith that Edith Stein sort of embodies, it's really the kind of faith that begins with doubt and honors
Opo.
doubt as the starting point of
Opo.
faith. Because sometimes when we think of ano ba ang ibig sabihin ng pananampalataya, ang minsan madali nating sabihin ay kailangan you have to lay claim to truth. You have to claim something and you have to hold on to that and even die for it. Well,
Uh-huh.
what if we think of faith from a place of doubt? What if the best that we can do is ask questions and then continue to believe in a way that perhaps exceeds logic? So, to go back to Emmaus, those two people that were walking outside of Jerusalem were enveloped in this experience of profound doubt. That person that gave insight to the reign of God was just killed. And so, how easy is it for us to simply say, mali pala yung naituro niya? Or perhaps, what does that mean? Ano ibig sabihin nun para sa atin? And so, you're actually not giving up by doubting. You're actually opening up possibilities of encounter in ways that exceeds even our most profound imaginations. And I think there's something to be said about believing from a place of questioning that can really speak deeply to us as human people, especially in our sense of loss.
Brother Mike, if I'm going to ask you, kasi you're talking about, you start from doubting, you start from
Right,
questioning, and that's beautiful. That's better than truth claiming. Pasok na
right.
pasok sa akin, napakaganda. If I'm going to ask you, can you give me one or two questions in your life where you started, or are those just bits of questions as you go on with your career, or there are two or three or one big question in your life that you started as a doubt, not as a truth claimer, something like, nakuha ko po yung ibig yung sabihin dun sa we start with questioning and that's better kaysa sa truth claiming, and it's a eureka moment for me and for all our soul, kasama natin soul traders. Sa buhay po ninyo, sa
Right.
struggles, sa buhay nyo, meron bang napakalaking question that you started it? Or, if I may rephrase my question, did you become an atheist or non-believer or agnostic at some point of your life?
I think sometimes the words actually, thank you for concluding with that. So the word agnostic often gets a really bad rap na parang, ay,
Mhm.
agnostic siya, ay, atheist siya. Parang nasa isip natin parang,
But on my case,
nag-itchupwera na yung tao eh, no?
no,
Parang
I
nag-itchupwera na
don't
yung
mean it that
simbahan.
way.
No, 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 no.
It's
I'm not
it's
actually saying that you're saying that. But
yes,
what I'm saying is that oftentimes those words become associated with on the other hand, if you're very secular, parang of course. On the
go
other hand, if
ahead.
we're very religious, it's also understood as somehow like, oh my God, parang inichipwera na niya ang pananampalataya. But actually, for me, kanina I had mentioned this growing awareness of my own identity as a gay man within a culture that perhaps already situates me as an outsider. Yes, those are one moments, and perhaps those are enduring moments. What does it mean for me
Mm-mm,
to
mm-mm.
somehow be rendered an outsider even before I was aware of what that means?
Wow.
But I also realize that that's not necessarily unusual. That lahat naman tayo nagkaroon ng mga eksperyensya, mga karanasan kung saan we think we actually are pretty decent people, and then suddenly we have an experience where we actually are exposed to the possibility of being not good enough, that we failed in some way, not because we made a very clear choice, but rather just who we are is an embodiment of failure. And so when I think about what it means to be an agnostic, to use the word that you raised, Kanina, it's not actually a rejection of anything, but perhaps it's a hesitation to start with truth claims as the starting point of faith, but rather to begin with questioning as the starting point of faith. Because when you actually identify or at least use the word agnostic, it's not actually um, a counterpoint to faith, it's actually a position of faith. It's by actually saying, I would like to honor my questions, I would like to honor my doubts as a way of understanding the complexity of our condition. No, kasi can I
Right.
can I go
Go
back
ahead.
earlier? No, so when
Go
you're
ahead.
thinking about, for example, actually Ate May talked about social class. No, if there's a reality that perhaps is very much a concern for most Filipinos, it's really class identity, and who determines who's part of the power structure and who's not. Sometimes that's just simply the result of the sheer luck of where you were born, the kinds of families into where you were born. And yet, at the same time, yes, the Philippines is an impoverished country. And yes, we're struggling, but you're also talking about a people that has attempted to make sense of it by making choices that seems counterintuitive. Let's talk about migration. Let's talk about that every Filipino, without exception, is touched by migration, not necessarily by choice, but
Mm,
perhaps because we commit deeply to our family. And so we choose to leave the very
mm,
people whom we commit to in order
mm.
to support them from abroad,
Opo.
enduring loneliness, enduring
Opo.
separation. I mean, those things don't make any sense, but they commit to um, a
To survive.
questioning of a condition that doesn't make any sense to us to
Wow.
begin with.
Mm-mm,
So
mm-mm.
that's what I mean by starting from a place of loss and doubt rather than starting from a place of certainty. To honor those experiences that are dehumanizing rather than look at them as a antithesis or as a counterpoint to faith.
Parang pumapasok
Speechless.
diyan yung humility.
Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely.
Acceptance that I know nothing.
Yes,
Yes.
yes, yes,
I am
yes.
this. I know nothing. And we are searching for the truth, even though we have years of hearing this and that. We've been to
Yeah,
school, we've been to so many seminars and that. Pero accepting that I still don't know anything, acceptance or humility to admit that you're still doubting, you're still questioning, you
right.
still have this doubts. Uh, that's one way of showing humility.
And Ate May, when you and I were talking with JREX when we were doing the tech run, no, I
Yeah.
was struck by the fact that the audience of Soul Treats basically are people from around the world. And I was
Yes.
struck by the fact that Soul Treats began at a point where we could have simply given up. It started during the pandemic when people were trying to find ways to connect. So this is actually counterintuitive, right? At a
Mm-mm.
moment when
Yes.
we were actually mandated to separate in order to survive, this platform insisted against that impossibility to connect,
Yeah. It was
because
born out.
this actually was not born out of certainty. This was born out of profound doubt. The
Mismo.
pandemic actually
Mismo.
left us profoundly in doubt about the certainty of our lives. All of us, without exception, have lost loved ones during the
Correct.
pandemic. And what does it mean to continue to ask questions? Why? Bakit ito ang nangyayari? Through a platform that seems almost impossible to conceive 2 to 3 years ago, because of this need to ask questions, because of the need to interrogate each other's assumptions and to be present with each other. I think there's something beautiful about this, actually.
Yes, by saying that, yun ngang meron tayong mga kilala na talaga yung kanilang pananampalataya masasabi natin napakalalim, no? But
Mm,
when time comes, yung magkaroon sila ng trials in their life,
right.
nandun pa rin yung human nature of asking, why?
Yes,
Bakit ako?
yes,
Bakit
exactly.
sa akin? Hindi
Mm-mm,
nawawala yun. So,
mm-mm,
yes. So,
definitely.
nandun pa rin talaga yung questioning.
In fact, and I
Kahit
think
nasa,
that's so powerful.
yeah,
That's so profoundly powerful, actually.
When, when you start with questions and interrogation, kita natin mga ka-soul treaters sa pinapakita sa atin ng ating very inspiring person ngayon, mga ka-soul treaters from all over the part of the planet. Nakikita natin yung wisdom na ini-impart niya sa atin is so overwhelming and yet kaya nating matanggap. No, kasi kanina, mga ka-soul treaters, habang binabasa ko yung resume ni Brad Michael, I'm thinking, paano namin dadalhin sa audience? How will this happen? But when started with, well, basically I'm a high school teacher. Tapos ayun, from there pinakita na niya sa atin yung trauma to hope, and that's so profound and yet so kaya natin na ipakita yung ating sarili. Precisely siguro, Brad Mike, Ate May, mga ka-soul treaters, and that's the wonder of this, sabi ko nga, saludo sa mga nasa likod ng soul treats. Kasi I just came
Mm,
a few months ago,
right,
ito lang mga nakaraan. But the thing is, ito yung wonder ng soul treat, Brad Mike eh.
right.
The audience, nakikita niya yung sarili niya doon sa ating very inspiring person, and a lot of times yung ating mga guests nagkakaroon ng healing, nagkakaroon ng transformation himself, nagkakaroon ng healing sa pag-i-impart ng mga pinagdaanan niya. In this case, napakaganda nung pinagmula natin na sa nakikita nyo. We start from interrogation, and which brings me to my question, Brother Mike. Being a high school teacher in the US, alam naman natin mga issues ngayon, di ba po? Of course, gun ownership and
Right, right.
extreme right
Mm-hmm,
ideology, extreme
right,
left
right.
ideology. Being a mentor, nakikita mong kailangan itong mga kabataan na to ang magandang perspective sa buhay. Makakapagbigay ka ba sa amin ngayon ng ano ba yung mga mas talagang kailangan ng kabataan natin ngayon? Not necessarily sa US, pati sa Pilipinas ha. Ano talaga ang kailangan ng mga kabataan natin ngayon?
Salamat, Kuya Mori. That's such an important question, even for
Thank
me
you.
to this day. Kasi kung tutuusin, tama ka nga eh. Dito sa Amerika, sa tingin ko, ang pinakamahirap na nangyayari is the inability of people to really talk across the line. Yung tinatawag nating binary thinking, na ako lang ang
Oh,
tama, ikaw
okay.
mali. Or,
Okay.
whether you're on the left or the right, it doesn't matter. It's when we become so ideologically static na
Okay.
hindi na natin kaya makinig sa tao dahil ang paniniwala natin ang pinaka-importante. Again, certainty is more
Yes, yes,
important
yes.
than asking. That's what happens. Like my certainty is my certainty, and therefore I don't care what you have to say and I don't care about your questions. So
Mm-mm.
it's actually not coming from a place of humility. It's actually coming from a place of
Mm-mm.
profound and perhaps displaced sense of
Mm-mm.
certainty.
Mm-mm.
And yes, that's actually the work that I try to do in the classroom. So I teach ethics. So yung klase na tinuturo ko, it's called ethics
Oh,
in high school. And I always tell the kids at the end of the year, what I would like for us to develop is not a sense of clarity kung ano ang ethical, but a sense of appreciation to continue asking questions and to continue unpacking our assumptions about truth. If we are able to develop the skills to unpack questions and to unpack our assumptions, then perhaps it's a good starting point to really learn to listen to another person. So that's one. Now, interestingly enough, because I also taught at De La Salle and also online, I learned a lot during the last elections. I'm totally gonna get political here. Pero, during the last elections, it was fascinating. Kasi, syempre, I was trying to get a sense, like, ano ba, sino ba boboto? Ano ba, si Bongbong ba o si Lenny? So, syempre, this is De La Salle. Most everybody was like, Lenny, Lenny, Lenny. So, of course, I was asking my friends at Ateneo, I was asking my friends, who were academicians, who were doing this, and I was asking them, so what do you think? Ano ba, Lenny ba, Bong ba, ano mangyayari nito? And even though the surveys were saying Bong Bong was leading, even my statistician friends were saying, ay, huwag ka maniwala dyan, it's gonna be Lenny, blah, 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 blah. And of course, when Bong Bong won, the first thing that I remember was that everybody was shocked. And, I reflected on that with my students kasi sabi namin, bakit ganon? Lahat ng experiensya natin, it showed that Lenny was leading. And what we realized was that our world was so small. Social media has this profound capacity to connect you to the reality outside of it, but it also has a profound capacity to magnify your
opo.
thought bubble. Ikaw lang
Ito
nasa
ba yung
yung
echo
kung ano.
chamber na
Yeah, I'm
sinasabi
sorry,
nila?
not thought bubble, but the echo chamber. You're sort of just
Okay.
living in your echo chamber, and you're no longer listening to people who don't look or think like you. So ang nangyayari nito, again, our truth becomes the beginning point of our claims about meaning. Our certainty is the only legitimate certainty, and we no longer are able to listen across the lines. So, more than whatever resulted from the election, what really worried me, for me, as a teacher, sabi ko, I thought I had my finger on the pulse of the nation. I
Opo.
didn't. My
Opo.
world was so limited to
Opo.
people who looked and thought and spoke like me.
Aha, aha.
And so that actually was an awakening for me about my own inability to really think across the line. So it even made for me it even made it more real for me to really start asking questions and maybe start challenging myself to step outside of my
Opo.
own circle of friends, the people that I typically,
Opo. Brad
hang
Mike,
out
Brad,
with. Yeah,
if I may, when you said your inability to think across the line, kasi nga
right.
dahil nanalo si Bongbong, was
Sure.
it, was your statement because, meron palang hindi ako alam, kaya siya nanalo?
Right.
Or, is it because nandito lang pala ako sa echo chamber ko na to? Ganun
It's
mo
both.
talaga?
It's
Okay.
both, definitely.
Okay.
My
Okay.
echo chamber was simply magnifying my beliefs. So I was
Okay.
basically just talking to myself.
Mm-mm.
Di ba? It's
Mm-mm.
solipsism. You're just talking to yourself. That's what the echo chamber is. You're talking to yourself, you're listening to yourself, everybody's affirming you. Para, ay, ang galing natin. O, pat on our shoulders. Parang pare-pareho
Precisely.
lang tayo. Pero,
Precisely.
the limitation of that is that we've actually stopped listening to
Mm-mm.
people. We
Mm-mm.
really aren't listening. We're just sort of looking for affirmations of what we already believe to be true.
And that's beautiful. Ate May, ang bilis ng oras mga ka-soul treaters.
Ah,
Kuya Mike,
speaking
we're
of
more than
questions,
1 hour. My God. Apa.
yeah, speaking of questions, may question si Kuya Nes. Kanina pa naandito.
Ay,
I'll just
sorry.
read
Right.
it.
Ayan,
Yan.
ayan.
The
Beautiful.
evangelist Luke did not mention the name of the companion of Cleophas on their way to Emmaus. Do you think that it has any connection or relevance to any person, perhaps anyone among us or other people who may not be identified with Jesus in general, in terms of being converted or following the ways of Jesus?
Um,
Yung isang companion, hindi
Oo,
pinangalanan.
oo, oo. Alam mo, hindi ako biblical scholar, so I'm not even going to pretend to know why one was named and the other was not named. So I'm not really sure why. I'm not really sure why, for example, one was named and the other not. But the one thing that I do know about the Gospel of Luke, ang audience kasi ng Gospel of Luke were primarily Gentiles, people who actually were not necessarily Jews. And so as a result of that, they were unusual amongst the early followers of Jesus because again, Jesus actually was a good Jew. He never wanted to start a religion. If anything else, I always tell my students, the founder of Christianity is not Jesus. If you want to get technical, it's Paul, right? Jesus wanted nothing more than to be a good Jew. But the interesting about the Gospel of Luke was that a good portion of his audience were Gentiles. So people who were not Jews, who themselves perhaps considered outsiders within this burgeoning Jewish sect. And so there's something about Luke naming stories about people who are oftentimes outside the official narratives. And maybe that's the reason why certain people are simply not named. Um, Maybe that's the reason why those that are not named are actually part of the story. So, yeah, I'm not really sure. That's a really good question. I'll have to research on that, or I'll have to ask my colleagues about like bakit isa may pangalan, isa wala.
Yes. Gusto ko lang banggitin ang sinabi ni Ate Emily Mendoza. Good evening, Kasol Tweeters, collaborators, and hosts. Watching and listening to our VIP tonight is so interesting. Thank you for sharing your faith of experience and wisdom.
Good
Thank you.
evening.
Ayan.
Good
Salamat
evening,
po.
Sister Emily. Kasama natin dito yan.
At nagtatanong din ang ating isang host, si Kuya Chris.
And I
Okay.
think this is a beautiful question from Kuya Chris. Brad Mike, what's your opinion about truth? Is it objective or subjective?
Sasagutin ko na ba to? That's a whole dissertation, no? Hindi, okay. Actually, why don't I give you the answer that I give my high school students, no?
Sige po.
Kasi so I teach ethics basically by teaching them the history of knowledge of what do you call this, of how we conceive of truth. So I always tell them in the classical worldview. So generally, when I talk about the classical worldview, I'm talking about pre-enlightenment, pre-Renaissance. There is this notion of truth as unchanging, objective, universal, and applicable to all across space and time. Truth with a capital T. But once we shifted beyond the Renaissance into the Enlightenment, we started to shift into notions of truth as somehow the result of shifting circumstances, or truth as more reliant on the interpretations of our subjective experiences today. And so I think, if you were to ask me what is truth, I think that's perhaps one of those questions that I will continuously ask. Rather than make a claim of what truth is, I think it's important for me and maybe for all of us to continue questioning even what we assume to be true.
Isang
Very
buong
nice.
dissertation encapsulated in a few beautiful sentences on what truth is. Ano po? Ito,
Pasensya, Brother Cruz. Anyway, go on.
Ayan na, Kuya Boris, ating Kuya Romy.
ito po, si galing kay Brad Romy Suligin. Good evening, Brother Michael. Most of the time, people are on to see is to believe. How will you encourage people to still believe even if they don't see, especially if they wish and pray but are not yet granted? What can you advise people who are desperate, hopeless to go on and wait, especially if they are in depression and anxiety? I think this is a very relevant question, very beautiful question.
Right.
Go ahead, Brother Mike.
Maraming salamat, Brother Romeo. I don't really, to be perfectly honest, I don't have a clear answer to that, except perhaps this. Sa akin, I can only answer from my experience. When I find myself in a position of darkness, where nothing makes sense. What
Mm.
really helps me is to be surrounded by people, by surrounded by community. Because having other people with me and then having the space to ask questions and not be judged for those questions actually become more important pathways to meaning rather than finding the answer. So this is where I think community is perhaps so profoundly important in any faith gathering. That's why kinakwento ko nga kay Ate May kanina when I found out that Soul Treats was founded as an attempt to speak against this profound separation that the pandemic imposed on us. That for me is precisely the power of community. We're not offering answers, but we're offering accompaniment. You're walking with another person. And by the way, that's the reason why the road to Emmaus is also beautiful. Jesus didn't appear as the source of truth. Jesus appeared as an accompaniment. He walked with them. And
Yes.
at the end of it, Jesus didn't say, ah, this is the truth. At the end of it, Jesus basically said, why don't we have dinner? Let's break bread. They saw Jesus not in the act of Jesus claiming a truth. They saw Jesus in the act of accompaniment. Let's share a meal. And maybe that's the best that we can do for each other.
Well said. Maraming
Parang yun
salamat
yung,
for that.
Kuya Mori, yun yung nabanggit ni Father, nung last VIP natin na theology of presence.
Right?
I cannot
Ah,
Exactly.
help
yes,
you,
yes.
but I will be with you.
Yes, definitely.
Ayan.
Si ano, ay yung he's a prefect of discipline sa ano si Father. Opo.
Yes.
Well, Tempus Fuji, time flies so fast. Nag-overtime tayo. Alam nyo,
Oh,
mga
okay
ka-soul
lang.
treaters, alam ko, grabe yung ating masasabi nating renaissance in a way sa pagkakataon na ito dahil we have this person in front of us imparting wisdom, insights on how to deal with questions. Ang gaganda rin naman ng mga itinatanong natin sa kanya, no, ang ating mga ka-soul treaters. Brother Mike,
Yeah.
kung makikita mo yung sarili mo 10, 15 years from now, um, ano yung ginagawa mo? Or nasaan lugar ka? Or do you may nasa teaching profession ka ba, or you're hoping to retire with a person with some things like that? How do you see yourself 15 years, 10 years from now?
Alam mo, retirement is not too far away from me na. Tumatanda na tayo. Pero, I have to say, one of the things I love about teaching is that I feel like this is something that exceeds um, just a profession. It's actually a way of life. I'll say this: when I was graduating from school in Boston, no, I remember one of my classmates, Filipino rin siya, and he was much more old than me. He was getting his master's degree. I think it was already close to 60. And I remember asking him, sabi ko, kailangan ko
Wow.
maghanap ng trabaho. Hindi ko alam kung anong trabaho gagawin ko, especially with a master's in theology, right? Ang sabi niya sa akin, napakasimple. Sabi niya, Mike, hanapin mo muna kung anong gusto mong gawin. At pag nahanap mo na yon, magdasal ka na sana may gustong bayaran ka sa ginagawa mo. And I think, when I think about teaching, how lucky am I that I'm in a profession that doesn't feel like a job, but
Opo.
rather it's something I can continue doing, um, perhaps for my life. And I don't really see myself doing anything else. So in terms of a profession, because
Beautiful.
that's how I see my life. That's how I live my life. It's always asking these
Wow.
questions. No?
Opo. Which
Yeah,
brings me to my question, ate may pasensya na.
Okay
Kasi
lang.
'di ba, ayaw ng kumbaga dinidiscourage ka ng papa mo sa teaching dahil
I
kita
know,
niya, 'di
right?
ba no? Pero nandiyan ka ngayon at nung time ba 'yon, nakipag dialectics ka ba sa
Di
kanya?
ba
Ay, grabe
dialectic
na.
talaga? No, actually,
Na,
no.
eto, ganito. At this point, wala na si dad or wala na
Mm-mm.
si papa mo a few days ago. Can you tell him something or ano ba nangyari? Ngayon, naramdaman ba niya na sa buhay mo naging fulfilled ka naman dun sa pinili niya, na sa pinili mo na initially ay ayaw niya?
Yeah, totally. By the way, the power of having your parents tell you what to do and what not to do is such that I too agreed with my dad. I thought that being a teacher was the most horrifying thing possible. In fact, it probably took me about 15 years to finally say, actually, gusto ko to. Kasi for 15 years, I was thinking like, ay nako, high school teacher, pwede ba? I can do so much more. Magpi-PhD ako, o di ba? Ganon, di ba? And at the end of it, actually, I ended up doing my PhD on a topic that wasn't driven for professional reasons. Like I wasn't getting a PhD so I can become, I don't
Apo,
know, a professor. I was
apo,
getting a PhD because I had questions that needed to be asked.
apo.
And the beautiful thing about it, going back to Papa, was this. When I wrote my dissertation, by the way, for any of us that have ever written dissertations, it's one of the most either horrifying experiences ever. For me, it was one of the most beautiful. I enjoyed writing so much. I
Grabe
really did.
naman.
Pero nobody's ever going to read the damn thing. The only people that read my dissertation was actually my four committee members and I suspect Papa. Kasi I sent it to my parents eh. And I remember months later, Papa said, alam mo, interesante yung sinasabi mo dissertation. And I was thinking like, you read my dissertation? Are you kidding me? Like, even I don't understand what I wrote. And it's kind of, for me, profoundly beautiful that Papa, who told me not to ever go into teaching ever again, actually took the time to read my dissertation. So now 5 people in the world have read my dissertation.
Is it online?
Yes, but I will discourage you from ever reading it. Because
Bakit?
even I
Bakit?
don't think, I think what I found at that time was already so different. I think it's already so passé. Kasi nagbago na yung mga katanungan ko eh, di
Okay,
ba?
okay. Apa,
So,
apa.
but,
That's beautiful. Apa. Ate May, ayan, overtime tayo
Ayan,
mga kasal
sabi nga
treaters.
ni
This
Kuya
is
Chris,
interesting.
what an eye-opening episode. Totoo naman.
Tunay.
Very true.
Tunay.
Yes. At sabi ni
Coming pong
Kuya
Kuya
Rory,
Chris, ha?
yeah. Thanks so much, Brother Michael. Great. Thanks, Kuya Maureen, Ate May. At ang sabi ni Brother Ronnie, thank you, Brother Mike. You are the
thank you.
best. Yan.
Apa.
Salamat
Ayan.
sa inyo lahat.
At this point, mga kasal treaters, as always, ayaw man natin, we have to
Pero
part
humihingi
ways.
ng part 2. Si Kuya Jairo.
Humihingi ng part 2 si
Magkakape na lang
Jairus.
kami pag umuwi ako ng Pilipinas.
Opo.
Promise
Total,
yun, magkape tayo. Ganun.
nasa Santa Rosa lang ako. Just
Magkapit
give me
bahay
a
lang
call.
naman tayo lahat eh.
Opo.
Oo.
Brad Michael, at this point, sasabihin lang namin na hihingi kami sa iyo ng final message para sa amin. Na po. Pero before your final message, meron pa akong isang question na hanging. Ha? May ako itatanong. So, one more question and then your final message. Pagkatapos ng final message mo, we are going to ask you to say a prayer for us. Okay? And when you say a prayer for us, may mga intentions ang bawat isa sa amin, may mga intentions ang ating mga soul treaters. Pagkatapos po nun, ng inyong final message, ira-wrap up lang po namin ni Ate May. Mabilis lang. Doon ka lang sa backstage, huwag kang aalis, papapicture kami for our remembrance. Ha? Ate May, meron pa ba tayong, alright, after na lang ng prayer ni
Ng
Brother
question
Michael
mo.
and his final message. Yung last question ko lang po. Brother Michael, can you talk to us outsiders? Can you tell something? Kasi this is nasa internet na tayo, may mga manonood ng replay nito, mga apo ko or and can you tell something about them or can you talk to outsiders? Sige po.
That's a beautiful question. And I think it really has to do with also what I probably would like to offer as my last message. I think it's to sit with our questions, not to be afraid of the questions that come up when we feel that we're outside a system. Because the questions themselves do two things. It affirms our voice, but it also allows us some agency and power to live within systems that perhaps may be arbitrary, that systems are not universal, that systems change over time. And so our questions have the capacity and the potential to transform the world.
Grabe. Maraming Maraming salamat, Brother Mike. If you might want to give us parang bye-bye and I'll see you
Okay.
sometime
Okay.
for your final message sa mga ka-soul treaters natin
Kaya
for this
pa-Sharon ba?
episode.
Pabaon.
Pa-Sharon, kung tawagin namin yan, pabaon pa Sharon.
O nga pala, pa-Sharon. I'm learning so much. Hindi Marites, pero pa-Sharon. O sige, pabaon.
Sharon, yes.
Basically, it goes back to what I just said. Be courageous to own your questions. Have the courage to embrace your loss and allow these questions and this sense of loss to ferry you forward. Because they can change your life and ultimately they can change all of our lives. And that's it.
Ate May, mga ka-soul treaters, samahan po ninyo ang magpugay sa taong nasa harap natin ngayon. The final message was overwhelming. And Brother Mike, hihingi po kami ng prayer.
Yes, definitely.
At this point, panalangin mo ang bawat isa and panalangin mo patuloy kaming magtanong at we start from questioning. Opo.
Okay.
Go ahead po.
So, perhaps the most appropriate prayer for me is to call on God who exceeds all names to ask us to enter into the space where this God who exceeds all that we ever understand of God brings us and perhaps realize that in seeking truth, to ask these questions, we may become open to the possibility of wisdom that is unexpected, surprising, and comforting. Maraming salamat po sa inyo and all the blessings of this week. There's so much power here. Maraming salamat po sa inyo.
That was beautiful.
Maraming salamat
Ate May.
po.
Brother Mike, from all of us soul treats, tanggapin mo ang aming pasasalamat, ha?
Thank you.
Brad J. Rex, thank you so much, Brad J. Rex.
Thanks,
Yes.
J-Rex.
That's beautiful. And so mga ka-soul treaters, I know we have learned a lot. We've been inspired. We are being encouraged not to start from claiming truth certainty, but it's better to start questioning as we travel this road to Emmaus, di ba po? And with that, Brad Mike, intayin mo lang kami sa likod at maraming salamat. And I hope makapagparto tayo and makainom tayo ng kape minsan.
Actually,
Makapaghalo-halo tayo ng Benz.
halo-halo, definitely.
Wow.
Thank you so much. Maraming salamat.
Okay.
Intayin mo lang kami sa
Maraming
likod,
salamat,
Brad
sir.
Mike.
Okay.
Grabe.
Ingat po kayo lahat.
Thank you.
Sabi ni Sister Josephine Vergara, that is really very inspiring. Truly, we need to embrace ourselves, our questions, our doubts, because they lead us to something true, good and beautiful. That's beautiful.
Wow.
Ate May,
Ang dami kong natutunan
bilis
ngayong
tumakbo ng
gabing
panahon
to.
natin. Ano yung take away mo sa nakita?
Yan, hindi ako nakapagsulat ng aking collaborators pad kasi talaga nakikinig ako.
Apo.
So, siguro estudyante ako mag-enroll ako sa klase ni Mike.
Galing.
Diba? Ang sarap niyang
Galing.
pakinggan. Siguro merong factor yun, maganda yung boses niya, pero masarap siyang pakinggan. Hindi nakaka-antok yung kanya mga sinasabi. Hindi, siguro very lively ang klase niya. So, yung pinaka-tumama sa akin is yung encountering hope in a profound loss. Diba? Human nature, napakahirap mong makita talaga yung hope. Kung ikaw yung mismong nakakaranas or nakaka-experience nung loss. Diba? If you are in that midst of doubt, moment of darkness, parang kung iisipin mo, napakahirap makita yung hope, di ba? Marami kasi nagsasabi, madali mo sabihin yan kasi wala ka sa sitwasyon na yun eh. Pero for that saying, encountering hope in a profound loss, it's very, very true para sa lahat. Yun ang talagang tumama sa akin in this, And the word that sinabi niya, yung humility to ask questions, yung wag yung alam ko na yan, I'm all knowing, so gano'n.
Opo,
So
opo, opo.
humility to accept that you still know nothing. Talagang the process of knowing yung, especially in our faith, talagang yung mystery of our faith, di ba? Napaka-misteryo ng ating pananampalataya, especially our Catholic faith. Marami tayong, diyan tayo tinutuligsa ng ibang religion na parang sila very profound sila pag nag-explain, kapag nagano, pero sa mga Catholic, iba, di ba? So, yun, learn to be the humility, learn to listen. Yan ang parang hindi ikaw dapat salita ng salita. You should also learn to listen, not to afraid to question, and be courageous and embrace your loss.
Beautiful.
Actually, napakadami. Talagang busog na busog ako dito sa episode na to. Maraming maraming salamat, Michael Campos. Talagang
Opo. Ayan, no.
dito kami sa iyo.
Pagsaludo ni Ate. Tunay.
Yes.
Ang sarap i-replay nito eh. Many times. Maraming uulit-ulitin ka, ay oo nga naman, ay oo nga naman. Sabi ko lagi, this is a gem in the internet, itong maliit na cyber mission natin. And this person in front of us earlier just proved it. Ano po? He started out with the blessing of human relationships. Alam niyo mga ka-soul treaters, yung guest natin ngayon, lagi niyang sinasabi, he's starting from question and he continues to ask questions. But the truth is, I see is, he understands human relationship. He understands the dynamics of trauma. He understands the transformation from trauma to hope. He understands the value of interrogation. And I'm thankful for this person. Pasensya na. I always say this. I seldom say this. Yung mga nagiging guest natin na somehow may connection agad. And this time, perhaps nasa top tier. Dahil iba yung naramdaman ko and ang ganda ng mga wisdom na impart niya sa atin. No po. Question palagi and have the courage to embrace yung trauma punta sa pag-asa. Maraming salamat mga ka-soul treaters at sana makasama natin muli si Brother Michael sa future. Maraming salamat Brother J-Rex. Maraming salamat po. At may mga announcements pa tayo. Go ahead.
Yes, for our next guest sa Wednesday, sorry. Our
Ayan.
Reverend Father Douglas Badong.
Badong.
Samahan niyo po
Ayan.
ulit kami sa May 10 para sa ating muling napaka-inspiring na pag-uusap. At
Father
marami
Douglas.
tayong matututunan
Apo.
sa Wednesday kay Father Douglas. Yan.
Apo. Ayan. Beautiful, beautiful. Maraming salamat. And ito, huwag kalimutan, mag-like, share, mag-subscribe tayo palagi ha. And spread the news. Tell your kapitbahay. And may mga pagkakataon din po na of course, nangailangan tayo ng mga GCash donations, kung sino sa inyo, di ba po? And mayroong mga stars dito sa Facebook na pwede naming tanggapin mula sa inyo out of your charity para sa mga overhead expenses natin dito sa StreamYard, sa Premium, and we truly appreciate that. Kita niyo naman ang sukli. High caliber people such as yung nakausap natin kanina. Ang ganda ng sabi ni Ate May, gusto kong mag-enroll sa classes niya.
Oo.
Brother Mike, wala ka bang crash courses dito sa online? Maghahanap pa, marami mag-enroll dyan. Sabi
Kaya
dito,
ini-invite namin kayo. Yan. Kaya ini-invite namin kayo mga ka-soultries to be part of our cyber mission. Dahil hindi lang kayo matututo rin kami sa inyo, matututo kayo sa amin at marami pa kayo matututunan in our journey of our cyber mission. Just send us our message to FB page and YouTube channel kung gusto niyo makakilala ng mga very inspiring person katulad ni Mr. Michael Campos. Yan. Once in a lifetime, di ba?
Ayan. So,
Ano
ayan,
nga ulit
Ate
yung
May.
sinasabi lagi ni Kuya Rai? Dahil sa sobrang dami nating natutunan ngayon, hindi lang
A mouthful. Mouthful.
hindi lang
Hindi lang
bite-size, it's a
bite-size yung blessings
mouthful
na tanggap natin.
blessings have been served to you tonight,
A
mga
mouthful of
kasulti.
blessings.
Yes. And see you all next
Okay, maraming salamat. See
Wednesday.
you all on Wednesday. Ate May,
Next
thank you so
Wednesday.
much.
Maraming salamat sa inyo lahat. We're now signing off. Maraming salamat. Good night
Bye-bye,
and
bye-bye.
good morning, good afternoon sa lahat ng nanonood ng Soul Treats from around the world.
Let's transform our trauma into hope. That's beautiful. Bye-bye. Bye-bye, Soul Treaters.
Bye-bye. Good night.
This has been another serving of your bite-sized blessings. See you again next episode with our special guest. Thank you for watching Soul Treats, a serving of bite-sized blessings. Don't forget to like, share, and press the notification bell for more blessings.